In this video, you're going to start cranking out some styles for the Indecision app. Now, what I want to do is talk about app.js real quick. This file originally contained a lot of code, and now it's really just the starting point. It's where we import code defined elsewhere. That allows us to have many small files as opposed to one big one. This is going to be the exact same architecture we'll be using for styles.scss. So we're not actually going to define any selectors or styles inside of here. Instead, we're just going to import selectors and styles defined elsewhere. That's going to allow us to break up our application styles into multiple files as opposed to having everything defined inside of here. Now, SCSS supports this import syntax by default, so we can use their import syntax and then we can create these separate files that get loaded in. Let's go ahead and start there. I'm going to make a new folder in the styles directory called base, and this is going to store a few things. One of them is going to be the base styles. So we're going to set up things like a global font family that's going to get used throughout our entire application. That'll live in a file inside of base called _ base.scss. So when we have our entry point, we call that one styles.scss or some name.scss. When we are creating a separate file that's going to get loaded in though, it's known as a partial, and partials start with _. So right here we're saying, hey, this file contains part of our application styles. We're going to create it, and now we can go ahead and do whatever it is we want to do. I'm going to be kicking things off by just targeting the body and setting the font family, letting us specify the typefaces we want to use. And there's a series of fallbacks here. So we start off with the most ideal one, and then we go on to the next ideal one. And finally, we have a very basic fallback. Each operating system and each user has a different set of fonts. So this is an important thing to set up. I'm going to start off with Helvetica. Now, not all machines are going to have Helvetica, and that's okay. If they don't, we'll fall back to the more commonly supported Arial. And if they don't have that, that's fine too. We'll just go back to the operating system's basic sans serif font. So we're going to get rid of those little serifs, creating a nice cleaner typeface. Now, if we save this base.scss partial, none of the styles are actually going to get applied because we haven't imported this. So what we're going to do is just that. Over here, we are going to remove our existing selector, and we're going to be using the SCSS at import syntax. This lets us provide the path to that partial. Now, this syntax is going to look different from the import syntax we used inside of JavaScript. They are very different things. They just happen to share the same name. So we start off with @import, and then we just go on to the file path. Now we want to use // and from this directory, from this styles folder, we want to go into base. Inside of base, we have our partial. Now, when we're importing a partial, we leave off the extension and the _. So it's just base. Now, if we go ahead and save styles.scss, we should see the blue go away, and we should see our new font being applied. And here we have that. All of the little serifs are gone away, and we have the brand new font showing up. Now, depending on your operating system and the fonts you have, you might be using your system's default sans serif, the Arial font, or if you're on Mac, you're most likely using Helvetica. With the global font family set up, there is one more big picture thing I want to talk about, and that's how we're going to be sizing things in this course. The spacing between elements and the sizes of the elements themselves. Inside of CSS, we have access to a few different units we can use, the most popular being pixels. In this course, we're actually going to be using REMs. You're going to find they're very simple to learn if you already know pixels. The one advantage is that they have better support for accessibility. That's going to allow users to customize things like their global font size, allowing them to scale the font size up and down in a way that works for them. So we'll be using REMs throughout. And to kick things off, let's just go ahead and take a quick peek at how they work. I'm going to create an H1 and set its font size equal to not a pixel-based value, but an REM-based value. Let's start with one REM. Now, if I save this, we can go ahead and see what happens over inside of the browser. We can see that our little Indecision H1 has become really, really small, and that's fine for the moment. I'm going to pick it out of the elements list using this tool right here, and I recommend just learning the keyboard shortcut. We're going to be using this time and time again, so it's a good practice to just memorize the keyboard shortcut. When you run that keyboard shortcut, you should be able to pick from the elements on the page. We're looking for the H1, and all that does is it brings it into focus down below. Once we have that picked, on the right-hand side, we can see the styles and the computed styles. I'm interested in the computed styles for the moment. I want to figure out exactly how big that is. Now, if I scroll down, we can see that the font size has been translated from REMs to pixels, and we're getting the value 16. So by default, one REM equals 16 pixels. Now, this can make things hard to reason about. It's easy to think in pixels because the browser ends up using them anyways. With REMs, though, we have to think about that conversion process. So if I want a 22-point font, how many REMs is that? We have to run through a complicated calculation. What we're going to do is make that process a whole lot easier with just a couple selectors. Up above, we're going to target the HTML document itself, and we're going to be setting a single style font size, and we'll be setting it equal to 62.5% of its current size. Now that number might seem arbitrary, but let's do a little napkin math. If I have a 16 pixel base, and I multiply that by 0.625, what's the result? It's 10. So now we're working with REMs in a base 10 system, just like pixels, which means that in the end of the day, we can start using values like 2.2 REMs, which will translate well into 22 pixels. And for the base size on the body, we can still keep it at 16. We just set font size equal to 1.6 REM. Now, the end result of this is that the rest of the application's font sizes stay the same, and the H1's font size gets bumped up. Now, I'm not actually going to include that here. We're going to define that font size later on. But for now, this is indeed the setup that we're going to be using. We have our global font family, and we have our sizes ready, which means we can start targeting the individual components on our page. To do that, let's first create a place for all of these files. I'm going to make a new folder in the styles folder called components. And in there, we're just going to start with the header for our page. So on the end of the day, that would just be this part, this dark bar with the title and the subtitle inside. We're going to start there, and we're going to slowly work our way through the rest of the things on the page, which means that inside of components, we're going to make a single file for the moment, though we'll have plenty more later. Underscore header.scss. Now remember, this is a partial that's not going to get loaded in by default. We have to explicitly import it right here. At import // inside of quotes, we're looking for the components folder, and in there we have the header partial. We leave off the underscore and the extension, which just results in header. Now that we have this saved, we can actually add some selectors and styles inside of here to target the header for Indecision app. Let's kick things off with a selector that targets the class header. In here, we're going to add some styles. Before we do, though, we have to actually use this class somewhere. Otherwise, the styles aren't going to apply to any elements in our application. If I go into the header component, we can go ahead and set that up. I'm going to toss it on this div right here, which means that I'll be using class name. Remember, there is no support for class in JSX. Class name will get converted to class because of the naming conflict. And we're going to set this equal to a string header. Now we can actually write some styles inside of this file. Those styles are going to apply to the head of our document. And to kick things off, let's just go ahead and set the background using the background property. For a lot of the colors, I already have hex values picked out. For example, that really dark color, that is a hex value of 20222B. Now we can also add some other things on. For example, I'm going to go ahead and set margin bottom equal to a value. This is going to put some space between the header and the things below it. Now, for our purposes, we can use 4.8 REMs, which is the equivalent of 48 pixels. And last up, before we save things, I'm going to set the padding. I'm going to put just a little bit of padding inside of here. We can go ahead and use 1.6 REMs followed by 0. So we're going to put 1.6 REMs worth of space above and below the elements, and we're going to put 0 on the left and the right. So if I save the header file, what's the end result? The end result is something like this. It is terrible, but our styles are indeed showing up. So we have that background color. We have a little bit of space below the header, and we have a little bit of internal space as well. Now, obviously, we're not done yet. We do need to set other properties. For example, the color, I'm going to set that equal to white by default. This is going to be way more readable on that dark background than it currently is. Now let's go ahead and toss a missing semicolon on there and figure out how we can target the stuff inside of header. Now SCSS adds support for nested selectors. So right here, I can toss a new selector like an H1, and I can add some styles on there. For now, let's just set color equal to red, something we can visually see. And this is perfectly valid SCSS. If I save the program, it is going to give a red color to any H1 that is inside of a header. And our H1 is indeed somewhere inside of something with the class of header, so the color red is used. Now the problem with this is that we get into a situation where we have a lot of nesting and a lot of specificity issues. Much like JavaScript callback hell is something we want to avoid inside of our styles. We want to avoid complex nesting. So instead, we're going to be breaking out the selector for that H1 into its own thing down below. Right here, we are going to create a class selector, header __ title. Now this naming convention is just that. It's a naming convention. It has no special meaning in SCSS. This is just a way to think about and structure our styles. So when I see this, I know that we're targeting a title somewhere inside of header. And this is actually known as the BEM naming convention, which stands for block element modifier. Now we'll explore modifiers later. For now, we're just going to talk about blocks and elements. A block is the core building block, something big like the header. And elements are things that go inside of that block to make them useful. So in this case, we have the title. So we put blocks and elements together to target everything in our application. That's exactly what we've just done here. Now we can actually add some styles onto this title. I'm going to start by setting the font size equal to 3.2 REM, and I'm going to set the margin equal to 0 on all sides, all four sides, top, right, bottom, and left. Now we need to go ahead and save this, but that's not enough. We haven't used this anywhere. We also need to go ahead and use it inside of the header component. On our H1, we just set up a class name, setting it equal to header __ title. Now, if we save the component, our styles are going to take effect. Over here, we do indeed see that. We have a new font size. We've removed some of that excess spacing. Now we can do the exact same thing for the subtitle as well. This is going to be an element of header. So .header __ subtitle. I then set up my selector and I pick the rules I want to apply. Now for this one, we are going to be setting a color, and I've picked out that hex value for you. It is A5AFD7. This is a nice off-white, and we're also going to go ahead and set just a few more. Now the default font size for that H2 is pretty big. Let's go ahead and bring that down to 1.6 REM or 16 pixels. We're also going to adjust the font weight. The font weight is the thickness of the font, and that subtitle is pretty thick. Let's bring it down to the normal font weight, 500. Lastly, we'll also reset the margin on this one. And if we go ahead and actually apply this class, we can see the changes take effect. Over here on the H2, that's class name, setting it equal to right here, header __ subtitle. Perfect. Now, if we save this, we should be able to see our styles applied, and they are indeed applied. We have the correct font weight, the correct font size, and the color is looking nice as well. So we're starting to see how this is becoming the final version of the application, but clearly there are a lot of things off. For example, this stuff isn't centered, it's pushed up against the left-hand side, and we also have this weird little space sitting around everything between the browser's edge and our content. We're going to go ahead and continue styling, fixing all of that stuff in the next one. For now, let's just take a quick moment to recap where we are so far. In this one, we learned how to break up our styles into multiple files, and we started by creating a base partial. Here, we define some big picture stuff like our global font family and our font size structure. Now this file gets loaded in by the main file, and that's why those selectors and styles are actually applied. We also created and loaded in a header partial. Inside of here, we targeted the header itself, and we targeted things inside of the header, and we used the BEM naming convention to get that done. This is a naming convention that we're going to be exploring throughout the course. If you do want to learn more, you can go to Get BEM. If you Google that, the website is getbem.com. This talks more about that naming convention, though we're just going to be talking more about it throughout this section. I'm very excited to continue styling this application, so I'll see you in the next video.